Tuesday on Daily Delivery. Michael Rand here. Glad to be back for another day. Hope you guys are all having a tremendous day out there today. Great show coming up. It's your usual Tuesday of football. Andrew Krammer joins me here in a little bit to talk Vikings, rewinding the film from the 31-29 loss to Detroit on Sunday. First Vikings loss of the year. Some things to like, a lot of things to not like, though, about how that one played out. The defense showed some cracks as Detroit scored touchdowns on 4 consecutive possessions in the middle of the game. Sam Darnold missed some plays, the play calling, things like that, the interior of the line. We'll get into all that here in just a little bit, including my 3 hot takeaways from that game. My good friend Keith Rashad joins me, too, for some Vikings poetry. After that, the only proper way to express yourself after a win or a loss for the Vikings is through poetry. A couple of wild thoughts at the end of the show. First, though, what did I miss? Let's start with basketball. NBA and WNBA. Timberwolves season starts tonight at Los Angeles at the Lakers. My sincere wish for this season, there's plenty of wishes I guess I would have for the Wolves and their fans, but my most sincere wish is that the season ends grievance-free, that you do not end this year with a grievance about the way things went down. Wolves fans ended last year with some grievances, right? Game 2 of the Western Conference Finals against Dallas. There's a ball that's knocked out of bounds. Goes off of Jaden McDaniels, but he was clearly fouled on the play. Ball goes back to Dallas, though, because of the way the rule is framed in that moment. They've changed the rules like a month ago, so now this season that ball would belong to the Timberwolves. Wolves were up 2 with like a minute left in that sequence. Ended up losing on that Luka Doncic 3. Ended up losing the series 4-1. So that ended poorly. Everybody remembers that moment. Everybody wants to say that was the thing that changed everything, and it was a bad call. I mean, it was the right call for the moment, but it was a bad call because they didn't see the foul. They couldn't overturn the foul. They were limited on the challenge. They did what they had to do. That, however, was one of several things down the stretch that didn't go the Wolves' way, but it's the only thing you tend to remember. It is the grievance that you hang on to as you remember how the Wolves lost in 5 to the Mavericks. You don't remember that they could have doubled Luka, that they shouldn't have given him such a clean look at the end of the game. You don't remember that they had chances to expand their lead and didn't do it. You don't remember that they could have scored on the final possession and didn't. All you remember is the grievance, and I don't want your season to end that way again. I want you to bring a different perspective into this year. This leads me to probably the final word I'll have on the WNBA and how the Lynx season ended on Sunday, Game 5 of the finals. I just went back and watched the final minute and a half. Of course, what we are fixated on, what Cheryl Reeve is fixated on right now, is the foul, the sequence that led to the foul called, that led to Breanna Stewart tying the game. This was only a small sliver of what Reeve said in a post-game rant afterwards.
I know all the headlines will be Reeve cries foul. Bring it on, right? Bring it on. Because it was stolen from us. Bring it on.
Was it a bad call? I think so. I think we saw it at home. We watched it at home. I was sitting here saying, you know what? That's not a foul. Review shows I don't think it's a foul. It's still a judgment call. I can see why a foul is called. I can see why the travel is missed because she's kind of bobbling the ball. You don't know when she gains possession, things like that. I think it's an 80-20 judgment call that should have gone in the Lynx' favor, and it didn't. That said, there were so many other moments down the stretch of that game that if you choose to only hold on to this grievance, to only hold on to this is why we lost, this was stolen from us, this was taken from us, we deserved it. You know what? That play was huge. It was monumental. Refs are human. If you want to think this is some vast conspiracy theory, I don't think so. Listen, they easily could have called Courtney Williams for fouling Sabrina Ionescu on a jump shot with about 30 seconds left. They didn't. Lynx got that rebound. By the way, Lynx had 2 other chances to get rebounds before that off of the Brianna Stewart miss when she missed 2 free throws. When Ionescu missed a 3, they could have come down with those balls cleanly. Might have been a different game. They might have had a different game if they had scored on a different possession earlier. They might have been a different game if Nafisa Collier had made her layup with 5 or 6 seconds left. She thinks she was bumped. She might have been bumped. She was right there. She was clean right at the basket, missed the layup, didn't even get the rim with it. So that is another piece of why they lost. Hey, and by the way, even after Stewart made those free throws, they still had an inbounds pass to their best player on the court that day, Kayla McBride. She had a clean look from 3, missed that as well. So you know what? There were 5 plays that could have gone differently for the Lynx to win that one. It is not stolen. It is a part of the narrative. So I hope that you can go into this NBA season not carrying that negative grievance energy. I don't like the grievance energy in our society right now. I don't like how everybody looks and says, this was unfair. That you say, your instinct is to blame external forces when we deem things are unfair, and only external forces when things don't go our way. What would have happened if the Lynx would have gotten 2 free throws at the end of the game to win that game? You know what? That's what happened in Game 4 when they sent Bridget Carlton to the line with 2 seconds left on a putback. They could have just said Ionescu was trying to box her out and not called a foul on that and sent that game to overtime. You know what? We've forgotten about that, haven't we? You forget how you win. You don't forget how you lose. So I'm just saying, I don't want you to carry that grievance energy into the NBA season. Clean slate. Let the chips fall where they may. The refs are going to be human. Try to let it go. Try to enjoy the season. Try not to have so much grievance. I know it's hard. I know it's hard for you as a Minnesota sports fan. You still remember Drew Pearson, which happened almost 50 years ago. You still yell at Phil Cuzzy, who, by the way, even though he missed that ball on Maurer, that was a leadoff situation for the Twins, Maurer still ended up getting a single on that bat. The Twins still ended up loading the bases with nobody out and not scoring a run. So maybe be mad a little bit at the Twins for not clutch hitting, in addition to being upset about Phil Cuzzy. So here's what I say. Bring that energy into the season. Bring the energy of, hey, you know what? Sometimes things might not go your way. Sometimes things might go your way. You might get the breaks that you don't remember. They tend to even out, even if that's not how your memory wants to think they do. All right, palate cleansing time. We're going to do a film review with Andrew Krammer right after the break. Let's review the film with Andrew Krammer here from the Vikings' first loss of the season, 31-29 on Sunday at US Bank Stadium, kind of throwing the NFC North into kind of a wide open state, Andrew, and maybe raising more questions about the Vikings than we had going in.
It did. Yeah, it did. I think Sam Darnold was the guy everybody was watching, certainly, and to see how he'd bounce back from what wasn't his best effort against the Jets or the second half against the Packers, certainly. And yeah, it was more of the ups and downs, more of the exciting big plays that we're used to seeing from this offense and that they're capable of, but not the consistency, the methodical nature that you certainly saw from Jared Goff and the Detroit Lions.
I'm going to start with my 3 hot takeaways, then we'll get into the review of the film. Some of these might overlap as well, but okay, this is the least of the spiciness, the least spicy of the 3 hot takeaways. Vikings missed Blake Cashman more than I could have ever imagined. He was really, the absence of him, especially in kind of over-the-middle pass coverage, I didn't realize how valuable he was until that game.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's a lot of ways that he was missed that we couldn't see, too, just because of how he's leaned on as a communicator. And Brian Flores talks about this Vikings defense as a check-based system, which often means that they could have 3 or 4 different play options before the snap, and they have to adjust and get into the right call. And Cashman runs a lot of that show. He points out a lot of things at the line of scrimmage, and so I don't think we'll ever get the truth on the record from Vikings Vikings coaches, but I wonder how limited their defensive package was with Ivan Pace having to handle some of that. From what I heard from players, it sounds like Harrison Smith stepped up and handled a little bit more as well. But it was kind of leaned on for a second-year player in Ivan Pace, who typically he had those duties taken away from him after handling it at the end of last year, and they gave it to a newcomer in Cashman just because of how good he is at it. And you mentioned, too, just his play, not just the mental side of things, but the guy was tied for the lead, the team lead, with 5 pass deflections entering the game in those first 5 games. The guy's a menace. He had, in that Jets game, made that awesome play where he leapt at Rodgers' arm and deflected the arm on a play that just seemed like was dead in the water for the Vikings in terms of affecting the quarterback. So he's a good blitzer, good cover guy, one of the smartest defenders that they have. And they've got guys like Metellus, Van Ginkel, who can step in and do those things. But Josh Metellus is a strong safety, and asking him to play what was 30, 40 snaps or so at that interior spot, because make no mistake, he was the main guy that replaced Blake Cashman because of how smart he is, how versatile he is. But this was such a run-heavy Detroit offense that you could tell up the middle, late in the game, they were leaning on the Vikings defensive lines. I think you're right. I think they missed Cashman a lot, not just intellect, not just pass coverage, but also because Josh Metellus is not the biggest natural run defender at linebacker.
Spicy hot takeaway number 2. If they hadn't gotten that procedure penalty near the end of the game, I think they would have not only tried, but I think Will Reichard would have made that 67-yarder. Because with the way he boomed that 57-yarder, there was room to spare. I have full faith in Will Reichard to make that kick.
He made a 58-yarder too earlier this season, second longest, or tied for the second longest, I think, in franchise history or something like that. He's got the leg, and Kevin O'Connell agreed with you. He said after the game, I would have brought him out there from 68 yards, but 73 obviously made it a bridge too far. And I think the thing was the Vikings got that penalty and really only got that second because of the penalty. So I don't know if this is even a hypothetical that could have happened, because there was a lot of talk on social media and Lions circles, NFL circles of like, wait a minute, how did that penalty not cause a 10-second runoff? And that penalty can kind of be used as a way to buy an extra second by running a play, even though you're not legal, if it doesn't cause a 10-second runoff, which it did not. So if they didn't get the penalty, I don't know if they get the snap off in time. It would have been very, very close. But yeah, man, like, what is it? 30 straight kicks for Will Reichard to begin his NFL career. It's phenomenal. And the guys certainly got the leg, but they felt like 73 yards was just outside of it.
I would think so. Yeah, 73 would have been a little bit too much, but it was a little frustrating too, because Darnold took forever to throw that ball. And if he throws it, if he's able to find somebody 2 seconds earlier, maybe they get up to midfield and have a chance to spike that ball with 1 or 2 seconds legally and maybe give him a chance at that. It's a tough spot to be in. You're at your own 30 with 15 seconds left. I did not think Detroit managed the clock very well at the end of the game, because they took the kneel downs that barely took any time. They kicked it off deep. It's like you could have basically had the Vikings down to like 2 or 3 seconds if you'd played that a little bit differently.
Yeah, they might have, but Sam couldn't make them pay for it. And the Vikings, I mean, at the end of the game themselves should have ran it out on their own possession, which I'm sure we'll talk about. Yes.
Final hot takeaway. I'm going to say right now the Lions are the best team in the NFL. I think they're the best teams in the NFL. That's the best team I've seen this season. I know Kansas City's undefeated. They got yourself some Patrick Mahomes. I get it. I think they're the best team in the NFL.
That's spicy. I like that. That is pretty spicy, because we're watching the Ravens tonight, or it'll have been last night for listeners of this podcast. I think they have contention for that. Anytime you've got Patrick Mahomes and Steve Spagnuolo's defense, they look phenomenal in Kansas City, even if the offense is sputtering. And I would still take Josh Allen in a 1-game sample size for any given game. But you're right. Best roster top to bottom. Detroit seems like the quote unquote new 49ers of the NFC in terms of the team that just seems so solid. However, they're going to miss Aiden Hutchinson
big time.
So much. And they're not going to be. I think we could talk a little bit too about why Detroit's such an issue for Minnesota, because the strengths of the Lions match up so well against the weaknesses of the Vikings. And the Detroit's not every week going to be able to win up the middle interior the way that they did consistently against this Vikings offense. And they're not going to scare every quarterback into making a lot of quick check down type or scramble decisions the way that Sam Darnold eventually seemed to get kind of into, where it was just the clock in his head was sped up. He left plays on the field at times. For a guy who threw for 250 yards, 22 of 27, box score, it looked good.
Yeah.
But in the game, it just seemed like he left too much on the field. Rewatching it, that definitely stood out. So to me, Detroit is going to have tougher tasks on defense than the Vikings gave them, because I think Sam Darnold just didn't take everything that Detroit was willing to give.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Maybe that dovetails into our film watch. I mean, I wanted to focus on one play in particular that Darnold didn't make, which is that 3rd and 4. Maybe we even go back to 2nd and 5. I had a listener, I talked about this on the live stream yesterday. A listener suggested that he checked into a run there on that 2nd and 5 play right before the 3rd and 4 that they didn't convert. And then maybe that ultimately kind of cost them 2 cracks at a first down. But, parsing that is what it is. He had Jefferson. He just missed him. It looked like Addison kind of popped into the route. Maybe he wasn't supposed to be there. What did you see on that play?
Yeah, that 3rd down, Darnold after the game put it on himself. He said, I need to make a better throw there. And that is what it looked like from the sideline view. But you pointed out that Addison is in the area. He's only about 4 yards upfield, shallower than Justin Jefferson. And then when you see the end zone view, when you go back and watch the all 22 angle, you can see clear as day, Jordan Addison is absolutely in Sam Darnold's throwing lane to Justin Jefferson, so much so that Addison goes up almost for the ball before kind of ducking when he sees that it's not for him. I don't think Addison's supposed to be there. I can't imagine that master play caller, schemer Kevin O'Connell is sitting there saying, yeah, we're going to put 2 guys within 5 yards of each other on 3rd down. What it looked like was Addison was running a little out route to the sideline and then was supposed to pivot on a route and come back inside and bring the defender with him. And that defender just stonewalled him, was physical with him, didn't let him get back inside right away. And by the time Addison crossed the defender's face to get inside, the ball was out of Darnold's hands and kind of coming over his head. That all happened so fast that I wonder, and Darnold probably isn't going to throw Jordan Addison under the bus. I do wonder if that is what affected Darnold to aim a little bit higher to Jefferson. And then, as we all know, Jefferson's fingertips just grazed the ball and he couldn't even get close to making that catch beyond that. So that would have been a first down if that pass is 6 inches just lower into Jefferson's hands, and perhaps if Jordan Addison is not in the way. And Addison overall had a pretty rough game. I mean, the two penalties were huge on him, operational penalties, one of them just lining up off sides, one of them being up on the line of scrimmage when he should have been back because he was covering an eligible receiver on the line. Just kind of mental mistakes that in a second-year player in this offense you're not really expecting to see. So it's the focus kind of stuff that's an issue for them. And yeah, I do think on that 3rd down, you're right to wonder how much Addison affected the angle of that throw.
Until he caught that deep ball, I barely had noticed him all game. Like, he just was not a factor. They need him. Like, I mean, maybe they need TJ Hawkinson just as much, and maybe he'll be back sooner rather than later. But it just felt like it's been too much. It feels like they have enough weapons that it shouldn't feel like the Justin Jefferson show, but it still feels like the Justin Jefferson show sometimes.
It does. And it just didn't seem like Jordan Addison had, I don't know if it was enough plays schemed up for him or what. Detroit did a good job in coverages. They disguised things quite a bit. Sam Darnold didn't say a lot after the game, but one of the only revealing things he said was that they do disguise quite a bit. And watching him, it seemed like he had a hard time deciding where I was going to go to. Things were taking an extra second longer. Then his clock would get sped up an extra second faster. And he wasn't
seeing ghosts. He was seeing ghosts, Andrew.
Didn't seem to be in the rhythm of the play. So again, the box score looked fine. He had a lot of big plays. You mentioned the 51-yarder to Addison, which I think to your point about Addison being a asset to this team. That was like the fourth fastest play by any ball carrier in Sunday's games. It was over 20 miles an hour. This kid can obviously play. We've seen it, 10 touchdowns last year. It's just they did not find ways to spring the ball downfield to him today other than that play, or on Sunday, I should say. And I do think that Sam Darnold is part of that. I think Sam Darnold's inability or lack of comfort to trust what he's seeing at times, whether it's the pressure in the pocket or the coverages downfield, I think that plays a big factor into why the Vikings are so sporadic on offense.
So what do you do now? I think this is kind of like your baseline Sam Darnold game, right? This is kind of like what you should expect of Sam Darnold going forward. It wasn't a terrible day. It wasn't a great day. His passer rating was over 100, but his QBR was below 50. So it kind of tells you the box score looked good. The game itself, the numbers came out clean, but the impact plays, he just wasn't quite getting it done. That kind of seems like what you should go into these games expecting. So you kind of know you can't put too much on him. And I think we've known that when you ask him to make too many plays, things are going to go haywire. So how do you scheme around his limitations, or what other limitations were revealed to you in this game?
Well, I don't think anything was too revealing other than just kind of seeing more of the same inconsistency that we kind of saw against the Jets when he wouldn't fire into tighter coverages against good corners. Well, then you get into the Lions game and he's forcing a ball to Jalen Naylor when Brian Branch is just all over him. But part of the problem is McNeil, the great Lions defensive tackle, gets a free rush on a twist and is blitzing or rushing right in Darnold's face. He kind of has to he feels like he has to force that ball to Naylor into tight coverage. Justin Jefferson is coming wide open on the backside of that play in single coverage, that if he was able to stand in the pocket, trust the protection, and deliver that ball, it's a big play. Instead, it's a Brian Branch deflection, and then Brian Branch stops the next play too because he's a great safety. I think they have multiple issues. And I think when your quarterback is not operating as cleanly as Kirk Cousins did in the previous couple seasons, those other issues are going to weigh you down more because that quarterback is not making the clean plays when they're there. There were other plays. There was a fake screen. This was actually Sam Darnold's 19-yard run. You look at that on its face. Sam Darnold was pressured. It looks great. And it was a fake screen to the right where they run Justin Jefferson in motion to the sideline. Brian Branch just comes screaming downhill toward him, leaves Jalen Naylor wide open. Jalen fakes a block, goes deep. We've seen him do it before with big plays. Jalen Naylor's wide open, 20 yards around him. Nobody there. Sam Darnold just runs for 19 yards. And yeah, he picks up a first down, but then they punted on the next series on 3rd and 9 because he didn't make a play. That could have been a touchdown to Naylor on the backside. Yeah. It's those kinds of things where it's like you're not taking everything that's out there. And the Lions are so aggressive that you can get them in moments like that, and he just didn't. So I think when you say what's the expectation with Sam, it's going to be that the other 10 guys have to play a dang near perfect game against the Detroit Lions for them to win, because you can't trust that Sam's going to do that when he admittedly has to handle more than anybody in that huddle. He has the most responsibilities. He has to think the fastest. He has to know more than everybody. And that's why he gets paid that much to go out there and do it. And he just hasn't been consistent this year, and certainly wasn't in that game. And hasn't been really since that Texans game when they just dominated start to finish.
All that said, they gave up touchdowns on 4 straight possessions. I think that's obviously that's probably the headline more so than anything Darnold did. How did Detroit just basically have that level of success on 4 straight drives when this defense has been kind of, one of the best in football this year?
Yeah, you watch those first 3 and outs too, or including the 4 and out when they went for the
4 and out, right?
The fake punt that didn't work. It looked like Brian Flores versus Ben Johnson, the Lions play caller. It looked like, Victory Flores. Right. But when you look at what happened on those 3 possessions, they had 3, I believe, different holding calls on those 3 possessions. 2 on the backup right guard, who was starting for Kevin Zeitler. And then 1 on Taylor Decker against Jonathan Grenard. Those 3 holding penalties set the Lions back. The Lions couldn't overcome from there. But the Lions didn't have those issues the rest of the game. Whether you want to blame officials for stopping calling the holding, or you want to blame the Vikings for not being able to stop the run, Ben Johnson got the best of Brian Flores. And Jared Goff played phenomenally. He was Oddly enough, only one passer was rated better than him against pressure on Sunday, and it was Sam Darnold. But I think that was because Sam Darnold took 4 sacks and scrambled 4 times in those pressure moments when he could have done more with it and taken more chances. He was a little too conservative. Goff got the ball out and let his guys run, and they made more plays than the Vikings did against pressure. And Goff just seemed more in command, and Ben Johnson seemed to be a step ahead of Brian Flores in some of those moments. I think back to the Jahmyr Gibbs 8-yard touchdown run. That's 3rd and 7 at the goal line. Kevin O'Connell says, we got to know that Dan Campbell's going to probably go for it on 4th down. We got to know that they might have a run play in there. And the Vikings didn't. That they were set up for pass. Josh Metellus is kind of near the line. He's not even looking at the backfield. And that's why Jahmyr Gibbs just walked right in. Right. So it's plays like that where the Vikings were guessing one thing that Lions did the other. And even like the last field goal to win the game for Detroit, Jonathan Grenard was dominating that game, beating Taylor Decker left and right. The only guy who was consistently pressuring Jared Goff.
Yes.
Yet he totally screwed up on a 16-yard catch. Do you remember the little dump off to Jahmyr Gibbs? Wide open, runs down the field into field goal range. Grenard's like, that was my guy. I was just rushing the quarterback so much, got duped by the play action, and then look back to the flat and see Gibbs. I mean, those are the kind of things, those mistakes in critical moments the Vikings typically don't make that all add up. And the Lions are an offense that I think they're set up to beat the Vikings. It is no coincidence that they have put up over 30 points in these last 3 meetings against Brian Flores, a defense that wants to give you an inch instead of the whole mile and see if you can go an inch down the field at a time. Detroit can do that. And Jared Goff has shown I can play cleanly, efficiently to do that. I will just dink and dunk my whole way down. We'll run the ball the whole way down. And they have been set up. You mentioned it. It was 4 straight touchdown drives or 3 straight, whatever it was. And it was like 70, 80 yards a pop. These were not easy, like 25-yard, 50-yard bombs or whatever. They had to dink and dunk their way mostly down the field. And that is kind of what Flores wants to give you. You just need to rally, tackle well. And the Vikings obviously couldn't do that in space either at times.
Well, that makes you think it's more scheme than anything, because I thought with better personnel this year, the outcome would be different. And instead, 31 points again. And I think you mentioned earlier, let's end with this. The interior line play that showed up in this game, the pressure up the middle at Darnold's face, forcing him to make some decisions. You had Ed Ingram struggling. Garrett Bradbury had a couple moments. And then, of course, on the other side, like they were just running over the Vikings and just, not able to stop them up in the middle.
Well, yeah, and we talk scheme, but it is also personnel. The Lions are just better up front. The Lions are better on the defensive line up front, interior, without Aiden Hutchinson especially, and they're better interior on the offensive line as well. And you just saw it when those runs I think of one for Ty Chandler that was 1 yard. Even when you block them straight up, it doesn't work. But this 1 yard run I'm talking about, Ed Ingram and Jordan Addison are blocking the same guy, and Alex Anzalone's unblocked just easily right up the middle. Like they're brain farts and mistakes that the Vikings make in run blocking that you can't afford to make against this team, because even when you do get them blocked, you don't do very well. So to me, the interiors were outmatched on both sides of the ball, and you could see Flores didn't want to go to his bench very much. He tried to rely on Harrison Phillips, Jonathan Bullard, Jerry Tillery. Those are the starters. They all played season high snap percentages in this game because typically they rotate him more. You got to keep him fresh. Right. At the end of the game, they leaned on him because of how tired those guys seemed to be, because of how much they were playing. It shows you the talent gap that the coaching staff was saying, you know what? We're going to trust our starters. We're not going to try and go deep in our depth chart here because we need these guys out there against this offensive line. It's one of the most talented rosters in football. Detroit is. We saw it going back to 2022 when they turned their season around at the very end. They continue to build on it. And obviously it's why they are reigning NFC champions, or NFC North champions, I should say.
Well, we'll get another shot in just a couple days here against the other team on the other side of the Jared Goff trade, the Rams. Matthew Stafford. I'm sure they're not sad. They won their Super Bowl, but they probably could use some of the draft picks that became the core of this Lions team probably would be helping the Rams right now. And instead, that's a 2-4 team that just barely beat the Raiders. Opportunity for the Vikings. The schedule gets soft from here. They could feel good about themselves pretty quick again.
Yeah, the Rams lines are not as good as Detroit.
No,
yeah,
Aaron Donald retiring makes a big difference, I would say.
So the Vikings this is going to be a breath of fresh air for the Vikings. They're going to be like, boy, this is easy compared to Detroit.
Yeah, all right. Thanks, Andrew. We'll talk again soon.
Sounds good, Mike. Thanks.
Good stuff from Andrew. Short week, Thursday against the Rams. Feels like an important moment in the arc of Sam Darnold. I think this game this past Sunday was kind of the quintessential Darnold game that you should expect going forward. How much he is below or above that from week to week will have a lot to do with how the Vikings do. How much he finishes the season above or below that will tell you a lot about how far this team can go. I think the overarching message here is that you shouldn't expect too much from Sam Darnold. If you're asking him to do too much to win games, I think more often than not, you are going to be disappointed.
Watch your dreams and savings grow with Royal Credit Union's 4.25% annual percentage yield 12-month certificate. Open now at any Royal office or online at rcu.org/certificate saver. Early withdrawal penalties could reduce earnings and principal. APY accurate as of 2/1/25. Insured by NCUA.
We have Vikings poetry for you today with my good friend Keith Rashad. The first week that we're doing this after a loss, I hope that hasn't affected your ability to write and emote with your poetry.
Every week I plunge the depths of my soul, whether it be for joy or pain, and I come up with poetry each and every time.
Great.
The only way to speak about football.
It's traditionally been the only way. Can you please give me Vaiku number 1, please?
Sorrow dominates. Life is just a cruel farce. Time to start tanking.
There were legitimately people. I think it was a post-game call-in show. I didn't hear it myself, but I saw secondhand someone basically saying, "Trade Darnold, start over." They're 5-1.
It's over.
It's silly.
It's over.
It's silly.
Time to start. You need a top 10 draft pick. They have to rebuild everything.
Rebuild it all. They've already got their quarterback, so I don't know what you're going to tank for. They only have 3 draft picks next year. I think a first rounder and 2 fifth rounders. So I don't know what you're going to tank for. Exactly.
That's why these picks need to be the best that they can be. You just need to lose all the rest of your games.
Yeah. Well, I know you don't believe. So I know you don't believe that, but yes.
I will concede. I will concede the possibility that maybe that is perhaps a bit of an overreaction.
Yeah.
I'll concede that possibility. But what I will not concede is that watching that game, the Vikings were very clearly the second best team on the field.
Yeah. Especially the way I put it in a post-game thing yesterday was when things were cooking for the Lions, they looked a lot easier for the Lions than they did for the Vikings, right? Like when they were moving the ball, it just looked easier for them to do it. When they were making stops, it looked easier for them to do it.
Well, one could, watching that game, it was easy to have more confidence in one team than the other.
Yeah.
Like you said, easier, right? It just was, you could tell one team was, for the most part, not always, because the Vikings did put up a fight and they do have talent and they've got a good team and lots of good players, but one team was more effectively able to impose their will on the other.
Yes.
And the reason why that game was close was because of a couple of miscues, like Dan Campbell being silly and
the fake punt. Yeah.
The fake punt. And then the defense gets another touchdown, right? So that's why the game ultimately was close. And this week was the first time when they were up by a point, and I remember thinking to myself, if they escape this game with a victory, this is the first game that'll feel like that they really did escape, that they didn't deserve to win it, that they stole one. And by the way, I am old enough to remember the days, right? The good old days when Jared Goff was an absolute fraud who was the worst. Like, he was a husk of a man who was basically ripping off the NFL and was the worst human being on planet Earth to ever strap on a helmet, and could not throw the ball more than 5 yards. And if he did throw the ball more than 5 yards, right, he would then suffer a bout of incontinence because it was just too much for him. And if I remember correctly, back in the day, if you remember, right, the commentary about this guy way back when, 5, 6, however many years ago, it was never confirmed. It was never confirmed, but there were whispers that he was even possibly a war criminal, right? I mean, it was just like, this guy was the absolute worst. And then nowadays, he looks like a guy that if you asked AI to generate a 21st century version of Joe Montana, this is what they would come up with.
Well,
and all of a sudden, he's this efficient cyborg who will just slice you up to know it. It's unbelievable. I don't know if I've ever seen a player turn the narrative of their career around like this guy has.
And maybe some of the narrative was unfair because he went to a Super Bowl very young. He wasn't bad with the Rams, but then the Stafford trade, I feel like, changes the narrative completely, right? Because he's got a big contract. It feels like he is foisted upon Detroit, right? Like, everyone's like, oh, they got to take on this contract to get all the draft picks if they're going to swap these quarterbacks. And then it's like, actually, he's not that bad. Maybe they're going to keep him around. Then all of a sudden it's like, is Jared Goff like one of the 10 best quarterbacks? Like, he's playing like it right now. I don't care for it. I don't like that this has happened.
Well, there's a poem about that later.
Okay, let's keep going then.
Okay. 4 straight touchdown drives. Then again, get a first down. Both sides were mortal.
Well, I think it starts with the line play, right? Like, Detroit seemed like they could get 5 to 8 yards on the ground whenever they wanted it, and they were just pushing the Vikings around. And the Vikings just weren't getting much pass rush until a little bit in the fourth quarter. They stopped a drive. They got I think Grenard got to Goff finally, but it was, I think that what you saw mostly was interior line play was definitely stacked in Detroit's favor. When they got rolling, it was just they were just the better team in that kind of second and third quarter by a long shot.
In our what seems to happen at the end of games is that we want to assign praise or blame to whatever. We want to point out who was the villain or who was most at fault for doing this or that. And I can't come up with one. I think both sides of the ball were equally culpable in how they performed in this game. And so it's one of those where there's no good ranking, right? Because when you give up 4 straight drives with touchdowns, that's not good. That's not what you want out of life. And it's clear this year that the defense is the better side of the team. Yep. Right? They're the ones who've really stirred the drink, as the straw that stirs the drink, as it were. So for them to give up 4 straight touchdown drives, it's not ideal. It's not what you want. That being said, just get a first down at the end of the game, right? Yep. All you got to do is complete that pass. And, Sam Darnold, if you take it like the big picture view, didn't play that bad of a game in many respects, but then also had some key mistakes, like not completing that pass. And then I don't have a clinician's eye, as it were. Like when I watch the game, it's just like, oh, I want to see them throw the ball far. Oh, fun,
yeah.
right?
You're not watching the all 11 film and breaking it down.
So I'm watching the game like a regular goofball, not necessarily X's and O's and all that kind of stuff. But I distinctly remember on that interception, I remember I saw Aaron Jones leak out of the backfield and run out to a space where there was nobody around him for 150 yards. It's somehow some of the Lions defensive players were apparently sitting in the stands or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I yelled to no one in particular in my living room, right? Just get him the ball, right?
Yep.
While my mom was sitting on one couch, disinterestedly looking at her phone, right? And my son was disinterestedly looking at his iPad. I'm sitting there yelling to nobody in particular because I am a crazy person who watches sports. Just get him the ball, right? And the most obvious thing that I've ever seen on a football field, and then he throws this goofy interception where he clearly didn't see the defender who undercut the route, and so you get those critical mistakes, right? And if you eliminate one or two of those on the offensive side of the ball, even though they didn't have necessarily that great of a game, they could have won the game.
Yes.
And so, it's hard to call it a Twins-like total system failure.
No.
But neither side did quite enough to actually win that game. So the blame is spread out equally as far as I'm concerned.
I agree. Both sides of the ball, like, make one play, right? Like, the defense has a chance to make a stop. The offense has a chance to get a first down on that last real drive. And I think Darnold, though, I think you see kind of the full range of the Darnold experience. And this is probably about like your average Sam. This is kind of what we probably should expect of Sam Darnold. I think he was maybe playing a little bit over his head in the first few games, and then he was a little bit worse than we should expect in that Jets game. This was kind of your quintessential Darnold game. He's going to make a mistake or two. He's going to make some big time throws because he had that really nice touchdown to Jefferson, had a really nice long deep pass to Addison. Like, he's going to make some big time throws. He's going to make some mistakes. If you're asking him to do more than this, you're probably asking too much, right?
Which is why you have to start tanking.
Which is why you have to take. All right, poem 3, please.
Have I seen it all? Sunday suggests otherwise. I hate the Lions?
I don't hate. I feel like I can't hate the Lions. I kind of like the way they play. I think they're a good team, but do you have to start hating them because they're good and now they're a division rival?
Well, that's the question, right?
Right.
For the first time
since forever. Yeah.
Since Barry Sanders, right?
Who you couldn't hate. Who you couldn't hate. You couldn't hate Barry Sanders.
Not. He was so good. He was so fun to watch. It was just unbelievable. But finally, this team is getting to the point. What is it? 4 straight losses to him now?
Right? Yes, at least 3 because they lost both of them last year and this year. So O'Connell's 1-4 against Detroit. So
when is the last time the Vikings were on a losing streak to the Lions? Right.
Right.
And so here we have a team, right, that out of nowhere starts giving us a whole bunch of hope. Right. And then come in the Lions, who demonstrate that they are the better team.
Yeah.
And again, if they would have won that game, it would have felt like a fluke for the first time this season.
Right.
And so the Lions come in and you have this potential magical, fun, crazy season. And then you get this stupid reality check against a team that you never had to worry about before. And I felt finally the beginning of some sensations of actually beginning to really dislike this team for maybe the first time in my life as a Vikings fan.
I'll buy it. I mean, I think there was a stretch where, who is it? Like Childress just owned the Lions. I think Childress and Tice were like a combined 16-2 against the Lions or something like that. So like the kind of like the early mid 2000s when the Lions were terrible and the Vikings were competitive, sometimes better than competitive. They just owned the Lions. You could just count on those. You could just bank those 2 wins every year. And you cannot come close to doing that anymore. They are probably the best team in the division right now, right? I think that's probably fair to say.
Oh, I think it's undeniable.
Yeah.
They are the best team in the division. They've got a superhuman quarterback built from the spare parts in some factory who's all of a sudden now the greatest thing in the world. And they've got a defense that's amazing even without the best defensive player on the planet. And so, it was a reminder of even though it's been a fun season, this team's still got a ways to go before it gets to where we would all like it to be.
Which is why, as you said, they probably should just tank.
Yep.
Always love Vikings poetry. And of course, they're not going to tank. Don't send me an email about that. We were kidding. Of course, they're 5-1, still in very good shape. Big picture wise, got some winnable games coming up. This team still feels like it's a 10-11 win team. Contending in the division, it's going to be more challenging now that you've lost a home game to the Lions, but still a contender, an overachiever at this point in the season. Let us now finish with the cooler. Speaking of overachievers, the Wild, I don't believe they've trailed all season long. The Vikings had not trailed much until they played the Lions. The Wild have not trailed at all this year in regulation time. At least they've had a couple of overtime shootout losses, things like that. But in regulation, they have not trailed this season. That is impressive. Some good company they're keeping there, but the competition gets much stiffer tonight. Florida Panthers, defending Stanley Cup champions, starting to see some better teams. So how will they hold up against the better teams? That's what we are waiting to see. They've played, Columbus a couple times. That's not a good team. They've played some other, they played Winnipeg, a good team, but they kind of got a point in that one. But in general, they have not played the toughest schedule. They've gotten off to a good start, taken advantage of that. How will that translate now that the competition is getting better? That will do it for me today. Good stuff coming up tomorrow. You'll learn about six-man football. I did not know about six-man football. Sounds wild to me, but Chip Scoggins will tell me more about that. Randy Johnson is going to join me to set up Gophers versus Maryland this weekend and give us a bigger picture look at Big Ten football. Until then, I am Michael Rand. Enjoy the start of the NBA season tonight. Wolves at Lakers. It's a late one. Staying up late. We'll see how that goes, and I'll talk about it on tomorrow's show.